So I'm a Christian. I've really been a Christian all my life, and I think we'll be talking about that a little bit later. But it's the most formative thing about me, and probably the first thing about me that I would use to describe myself. I live my faith every day, and even the days when it's hard, when it's easy, it's just inherent in me, and it's been a part of me in my life since as far back as I can remember. I'm an artist, and that's not a word I had used to describe myself until I was close to 40, when a friend of mine who's a teacher of mine in seminary called me an artist, and I looked at her and I said, well, you're the artist, I'm just kind of a hack. But she really refused to let me think anything otherwise. And it's funny because I come from a very creative family. It's very genetic. It comes out in different ways. Some of us are more talented at things than others. For instance, my nephews are extremely good artists, particularly my oldest nephew. He can draw anything. I cannot draw a stick figure to save my life. Pictionary, my stuff is extremely basic, but he can draw like the Mona Lisa, and here I am drawing a smiley face. And so it comes out in different ways. Mine tends to come out in photography and anything I can lay out in front of me. So I'm an artist in that way. And then I guess the last thing, global kid. I am a foreign service kid. I grew up overseas. I was born overseas, raised in embassy communities and DoD communities with mill brats and other foreign service kids. And it's not something that you can ever remove from me. It's like a limb. It's a life I was born into, and it was the way I was raised. So I'm very internationally minded. It's besides being a Christian, it's really the first part about me. Those two things really together. So I hope that describes a little about myself. I think it's just because it's so much a part of who I am that it comes out. That's one answer. Another answer is when you're a writer, they say write what you know, because that's when you're the truest about who you are and how you express yourself and how you can connect the most with people, because there's so many universal parts to that. Even if you're writing what you know, which may not exactly correspond to somebody else's life, there are elements of that will correspond. So it's always good to write what you know, or to create what you know, create who you are, because that's what will transcend the work and will meet people in those places. So in terms of being a Christian, I'm really a church kid. I've been a church kid my entire life, and I'm still a church kid. I am really a faith-based artist. I'm a faith-based person, and it's very difficult to take those two things apart. So whatever I do really has an element of God in it. If not fully, then at least partially. I try really hard to just get out of the way of the Holy Spirit and let God be at work through what I do. And so the Christian part of me, it really influences my art. I'm an artist, and so whatever I do, it tends to come out with some artistic integrity. And then being a foreign service kid, I do a lot of stuff that really it draws upon my past, but also at the same time includes my present. I'll work with groups that are international. Currently, I try to bring an international feel to things, an international voice to conversations. So it's really important for me to not only be those things in just who I am, but also to continue to live out that life that I know and that God has given me. So I tell people that I was converted in the womb, which I don't know that I've ever not known a day without knowing God. And that's not necessarily true for other family members. So it's not like it's just a family thing. It's really who I am. But I was raised in a Christian family. I grew up in a Christian family, so I've known about God and Jesus and Bible stories since I was small. I was raised in churches, and so I've known about it. I remember when I was 8, and we learned about asking Jesus into our hearts, and I remember thinking, well, I didn't know the word at the time, but but I remember thinking, isn't this a little redundant? Because isn't he already in my heart? Do I have to ask him in? I mean, I figured he was already there, but to be on the safe side, I remember praying that prayer many times just to make sure God heard it. So I was very, how do you call it? I was very cautious in that regard, and I wanted to make sure that bases were covered. But at the same time, I remember thinking, well, I've known him, I know him, and isn't he already there? So, yeah, I don't know, I don't have an exact answer to that question. I was a little kid. My parents always had coffee table books, photography books, and I remember one in particular, Life's, like the 25th anniversary of Life edition of like the best photos Life had ever published. And I remember probably a little kid, 2 years old, always gravitating towards that book, always being attracted to it. I remember I'm a extrovert loner. I have my solitary moments. I really need to be able to recharge. And so I remember going we were in London at the time. I remember going into our living room and on an almost daily basis pulling that coffee table book off of the table and having it in my lap and just poring over it. And I can still to this day tell you nearly every frame in that book, every inch of every frame. I memorized every image, and it was just something about still photography, still images, really powerful still images that to me convey more than standing up and speaking. For me at least, it connects in such a deep way. I'm a really visual person, and so when I was still small, I guess I was probably third grade. We were in Korea at the time. My mom handed me an Instamatic camera. It was that day's point and shoot. And I was going on a field trip, and she said, don't lose it, and don't break it. And I was just beside myself, and I remember taking all these pictures on this field trip, and I didn't break the camera, I didn't lose it, and I was hooked. And shortly thereafter, one Christmas, I started getting Instamatics, and I would use my allowance for film and developing. And even when I was in high school and I was supposed to be using it for clothes, I'd save it up and use it for film and developing. And it was just, it was a part of my life. The instant I had a camera in my hands, it was magic. And I still use it constantly. I've upgraded from an Instamatic, but.
Yeah, I save most of my money for photography.
Do you do the same thing? See, we totally understand one another, James.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Things have changed a lot because of cards and all, but yeah, it's huge. It was huge. Yeah. And it's really amazing for parents to actually pay attention enough to know to do that. I mean, that's like shocking. My family wasn't always all together that gifted, and it was also really interesting. My grandmother, I found out later, my mom's mom, she always had a camera for years, and I have now inherited all of her old cameras, from the Brownies, which is basically a cardboard box, to a little bit more sophisticated older models, and she was always documenting their life, and they did not have money. These people were poor. They were thrifty and poor, and to survive the Depression, but she managed to have a camera and wanted to be able to document things, and so I really appreciate that. I think it's the genetic line continues. Serve God and convey the gospel to other believers. It's really been going. It's been a 30-year journey of using visual media in church. It started when I was in high school. Here at VPC, I learned how to put together slideshows, and this was back in the day when we had slides and we had Dissolve unit and we had 2 projectors, and we learned how to pull images and fit them to a song, and then we showed it to the whole youth group, usually after retreats, after mission projects, things like that. And so early days, it was really about showing how God was at work in our midst. Then it became incorporating them into services. Back when we started our Saturday night service in the early 90s, which is about 10 years after I first started doing work on stuff here, it became how do you convey God's work in our world that fits within a worship service structure? So usually conveying whatever theme or message that was going on. So it was a matter of creating something out of nothing that didn't necessarily happen before. Like before, it was stuff that documents something that had happened. Then it became, all right, I have to start being creative. I have to start thinking of songs to use or things to take pictures of and how to put that together. Moving from like the early 80s to the 90s when we did our Saturday night service, a lot of it was sort of seeing how technology would carry over. It would transition from, in the early days of our service, from PowerPoint to then Keynote, which has a lot more flexibility and a lot more oomph, and is what I really prefer to work with, and really just enables me to be able to convey what I believe God wants me to say in an artistic medium, but also at the same time really trying to get out of the way of God so that He is able to speak His truth to the folks out who are sitting in the pews. So what happened, this is how it all kind of started. It started here when I was in high school. I learned in youth group, we started with slides that were taken at events like retreats and on our mission projects, and a few of us were taught how to go through those slides, pull the best images, match them up to a song, and then present it to the youth group. And it was a great way for us to be able to document what had happened and to be able to then remember and relive it and to see God at work through that experience, which was wonderful. That was early 80s. In the 90s, I started working, volunteering here with our Saturday night service when it started. It was called Saturday Night, what was it called? VPC Saturday Night. And back then, we still were doing slides and the whole dissolve unit, 2 projectors, but it was stuff that I would shoot specifically for the service. So it wasn't something that was necessarily a documentary type. It was something creative. It had to match the service theme, the message, to kind of create a unified whole. And so I was back to my days of doing the dissolve unit, but it was more challenging because it had to be more creative. I had to start from scratch with coming up with an idea and finding a song and then shooting to sort of bridge those two. So that was incredible training for what came next, which was then moving from slideshows to PowerPoint slides, and then over the years moving from Saturday night service to then some services here, big events, choral events, using Keynote, which is a Mac product, a lot more powerful than PowerPoint, but still the same thing, coming up with an idea, a theme, working with the folks who are planning the choral event or the service, making sure it's all tied together, and it has to be sound theologically and liturgically. It's really meant to be a means of conveying who God is and what we believe about God and what is true about God and God at work in our lives, but at the same time having some room for God to be able to work through it to reach the hearts and minds of the people who are sitting in the pews. It's very important for me to remember and acknowledge that worship is a two-way street. It's not just directed at God, but it's also an avenue for God to work through to reach us. And so I try really hard to be a vessel and to just get out of the way of the Holy Spirit. And when ideas pop into my head, I tend to just go with that. And it rarely fails me. There are some that worry me because they're so out there. And I have to think about it for a while. But they're usually very timely, and again, I have to be challenged. So it's really an opportunity. It helps me marry all the things I care about. Being a Christian and being a church kid, and then being able to use my photography and other artistic skills, because it's not just images; it's also words, or the two together. So it's kind of a way to be artistic all over the place. And it's really important for me that it be done well. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I think it has to be done well, and there has to be integrity to it. It's not just something you throw together, and it shouldn't be distracting. So that's what's important for me. It should be an accompaniment. It should be an enhancing part of the whole thing, and really working together. And I think that spirit allows God to really infuse it and to be a part of it. in a nutshell, I'm a photographer. I put together print media. I do visual media, electronic stuff. I've done some websites. I did those way back in the day, and I'm getting back to that. Getting into film a little bit. I don't have enough time to devote to that, but it's something I want to get more into. So I do a little film. What else do I do? I think that covers it. I think that's about right. Yeah, that's a great question. Back when '94, when the genocide happened, I had just left the State Department, and I remember I was a peon at the State Department, but I remember feeling utterly powerless about what was happening and furious that no one was doing anything about it. And I was mad. I was just mad. And time passed, and about, I guess, gosh, it was probably 3 years ago. I went to a friend's church in Tennessee, and they have a coffee shop, and it's just brand new, and they know I like coffee, and they know they like sweet tea, but they wanted to show me their coffee shop. And I walked in, and I thought, okay, I'll have some coffee. And I see these little handouts and stuff that this coffee company called Land of a Thousand Hills had, and apparently they carried exclusively that coffee. And so I'm thinking, oh, well, it looks like this is another organization that's doing good things, so like big deal. There's like 3,000 of them out there and whatever. And then I had the coffee, and I thought, man, this is really excellent coffee. They know how to do coffee, right? So then I went back to the handouts, and I'm looking at these things, and I decided right then and there, it happened to have been Rwandan coffee. So I remember thinking, so who are these people, and where are they, and what do they do, and how did they get involved in Rwanda? Turns out that it's Rwandan coffee, and they're very heavily influencing the efforts to promote healing and reconciliation between the Hutus and Tutsis. They're working hard in some really remote regions of Rwanda, and I thought, gosh, this is quite something, and it really matches up with everything that I believe in. Their community trade model, it's about not taking away jobs from them. It's about employing the people. It's about identifying needs in the community, and just helping out those who need a hand, but yet not taking away from the community at the same time. So at any rate, I came home and researched them and started harassing them, and I never harassed anybody, but I harassed them and said, I think I can help you. And they thought, who are you, and where did you come from, and why are you bothering us? And but it worked, and next thing you know, they said, well, here's a print piece, see what you can do with this. And I did that as a volunteer, and one thing led to another, and next thing you know, a few months later, I was invited to go to to Rwanda with them as on their very first trip, and I've now made 3 trips over the course of 2 years, and love it, and it's a big part of who I am and what I believe. I serve as photographer. I give them everything I shoot, and they use some of it in social media. I actually have one of my pictures is on the cover of one of the bags of coffee they just rebranded, and my picture is on the dark roast, so I'm all excited about that. And it's really fun to be able to share that with people. It's a big selling point. It's like, here, buy the dark, and you'll have one of my pictures. And but they become really good friends to me, and great supporters of me and my work. And I've done a few things for them over the course of the last few years. But yeah, have been able to give me, an opportunity and an avenue with which to help these people in this country that, 20 years, not even 20 years ago, I felt so powerless when watching the genocide. So it's been an incredible opportunity and privilege, an honor to be able to go there and become friends with these folks and develop relationships with them. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I don't know how many more trips I have in me to go back to Rwanda, but I'm hoping it's the rest of my life. And amazing opportunity. So here's what I would say to anybody who asks me about pursuing their call. I would say, don't give up. Don't listen to the naysayers. Believe that God will provide. Make sure it's a call from God, and when it is, you will feel that hand at your back, and there will be no turning back. There will be no turning around. There will be no way but forward, even when it gets hard. So I just say, go forward. Don't give up.